Hey folks, welcome back to another edition of Monday Morning Mailbag. I have my colleague Noah Pyles here who's going to kick us off with this week's first question.
So this is a common question we get from tons of customers out there. There's often the feeling that they want to be more sustainable, but they don't have decision-making power. And so it's often asked, what is the best way for me to have an impact?
Yeah, we certainly resonate with this feeling as folks that actually worked at the bench as well. Oftentimes, the choice of what is bought, what services are utilized, doesn't necessarily fall under your purview as a scientist working at the bench, innovating at the bench. Even if you don't choose the consumables that you buy or the vendors that you partner with at the bench, don't underestimate the fact that your voice in the laboratory shapes demand. Every time you request a product or a program that has sustainability built in from the get-go, it signals to your colleagues in procurement, it signals to leadership what matters for you as an individual contributor at the bench. Even if your lab's large, even if your lab's small, however small, it contributes to a market signal that's really important for manufacturers to see that scientists like you value circularity in the case of plastics, value support for extended producer responsibilities for these materials, and it truly does shape market demand. So certainly don't underestimate the impact that you can have by voicing your desire to innovate in a more sustainable way.
When I think about this question, I think about how I had these internal feelings of um, cognitive dissonance when I worked in a lab. And I was always bothered by the way we were dependent and the degree to which we were dependent on single-use plastics. And then I talked to someone else about it, found out that I felt the same way. And then, me and James ended up starting a company to address this issue. And so I think what you'll find is that starting a conversation with your colleagues will mean more people are actually interested in this issue and addressing it. And when you have collective demand for a service, especially when it ultimately good for the environment and probably good for the mental health of everybody in the laboratory, then people are going to invest in it. And so I would a good place to start is have a conversation with your colleagues.
So I hear all the time about the importance of just starting when it comes to lab sustainability. For folks that are operating in the lab, in your experience, Noah, where's the best place for folks to start? How do they just get started?
Yeah, again, I harken back to the beginning for our company because we just originally didn't want to start a company. We're just like, we need to just recycle some of this plastic. What can we do? There's got to be something out there. And so what we found was there was no infrastructure. There was no reverse logistics. And so we had to build out that infrastructure, those reverse logistics to create the supply chain for recycling in a laboratory environment. Today, with groups like Polycarbin, you don't have to do that. You can start as simple as purchasing a mailback, which is an opportunity for you to recycle the lowest hanging fruit, highest turnover, highest carbon footprint item in your laboratory, which is the pipette tip box. And you can expand that based on volume to something like our core services, which allows you to recycle thousands of pounds of material. And so now with services like Polycarbon out there, it's a lot easier to just make the decision, hey, I can put a new 1 square foot bin in my laboratory. I can divert this material from landfill and incineration in some instances, and I can ultimately track the impact that's having on the environment that my lab is ultimately contributing, and just measure that impact over time. And so I think the easiest place to start is the services side. How can I divert this from landfill and incineration?
Yeah, as I'm thinking about concrete steps there for folks to get started, you brought up one of them. Step one, target that low hanging fruit. Every lab's slightly different. Every lab is at a different point within their sustainability journey, but there's absolutely low hanging fruit in terms of large volume material streams or easily identifiable and diverted products, like you mentioned, pipette tip boxes. And in some of the cases for our laboratories, nitrile gloves. These are quick wins that engage your colleagues, that get them on board, and through data, ISO compliant data, can be pointed to as a key win early on. In
I
addition to kind of,
Can I drill down on that idea of low hanging fruit? When you and I say that often, I want to just spell it out for everyone out there. What we mean is high turnover, high carbon impact, low probability of contamination products, which means lower risk of non-conformance with a group like polycarbon. So that's what James and I mean by low hanging fruit, is that it is a low risk stream that has a high carbon impact and has high turnover.
so once we move beyond that low hanging fruit, I view step two as maybe the more advanced or more tactical opportunity that labs have, which is looking for unnecessary overclassification. Every lab that I've been in has this unfortunate tendency of believing that everything produced in the lab is de facto infectious or hazardous. This not only creates unnecessary costs, unnecessary carbon emissions, but it really doesn't serve to give scientists the benefit of the doubt that they're actually capable of successfully diverting these materials. Overclassification exists everywhere in the lab. Polycarbin works very closely with our colleagues in EH&S and lab ops to make sure that materials can be safely front-end separated and segregated while reducing that unnecessary overclassification.
Yeah, and the process of remediation for regulated medical waste or regulated plastics is extremely carbon intensive. And so not only are you paying more on a price per pound to dispose the material in that fashion, but you're also adding an extra thermal step to a piece of material that doesn't need it before it ultimately gets landfilled or, again, incinerated and turned directly into atmospheric carbon dioxide. And so if the cost doesn't do it for you, you should be thinking in terms of why am I unnecessarily adding an extra fossil fuel intensive step to dispose of a material that ultimately, as a resource, is fitting for a circular economy.
So Noah, folks find it, in our experience, pretty easy to engage in services that optimize for landfill diversion, that participate in closed loop recycling. As those scientists, as those labs mature and they think about going beyond recycling as a way of engaging in plastic circularity, how have you seen organizations optimize for sustainable procurement as well?
Yeah. So this is kind of the final phase of embracing circularity as a solution in our space, which is you engage with services to create an opportunity for the resource to be recycled. And then you work with brands that are practicing the highest level of extended producer responsibility to be stewards of that material with you, bring it back into the production of closed loop resins, and bring that back into your laboratory in the form of new products. And so we know from our experience working with customers in this phase, this takes time. But the most important thing you can do as a customer is demonstrate demand for the services and also for products that have measurable, verifiable circular economy resin in them. Um, and this is probably the greatest advantage of a circular economy is that when you achieve a full closed loop system, your consumables budget, your lab products budget starts to become your sustainability budget. You are buying back products that come with a reduction in CO2 emission, fresh water consumption, fossil fuels displaced in the market. You are buying those products back because of the data, and they serve as part of your sustainability budget. And that is the ultimate, most cost effective way to engage with sustainability in a laboratory is to make sure that you have created a closed ecosystem for single-use plastics that you are recycling and bringing back in the form of second, third, and fourth generation products again. Yeah, so we're kind of drilling down on, I think, a major issue that people are talking about these days, which is how can you combine sustainability and cost savings?
Yeah, with our team and our community of scientists, we're always framing these sustainability opportunities as a way of helping labs save on both cost and carbon. We've done a good job of outlining how closed loop recycling can be used as a power lever specifically to reduce your carbon footprint, but how can it also help you save on costs? With the labs that we work with, we've seen that identifying an opportunity to reduce unnecessary waste overclassifications often confers cost savings. Going back to a previous comment that we've made, this historical belief that everything in the laboratory is destined for red bag waste or hazardous waste oftentimes creates unnecessary costs due to the treatment required for these materials. Focusing on front-end diversion of these plastics, these clean, valuable plastics that are uniquely suited for circularity, is one way of unlocking cost savings. The second way is by reevaluating your disposal outlets, particularly in our two largest markets, California and in Massachusetts. We've seen many of our labs historically opt for landfill diversion by utilizing waste energy or incineration outlets. The costs of these services have risen dramatically, and polycarbon is actually now the cheapest alternative to landfill for laboratories seeking zero waste to landfill certification.
It's a really good point, and I'm going to say that again so that everyone heard it, which is that an apples to apples comparison between mechanical recycling through polycarbon and waste to energy, we are cheaper. And so I do want to emphasize that the stigma that sustainability equals more costly or green premium is not necessarily the case. And especially when you start buying products made with closed loop resins, that's when you can really see that I am already going to buy these pipette tip boxes. Now, when I buy them, they contribute to the total CO2 emission reduced by my laboratory every turn. And so I do want to emphasize that.
When you think about how to make the case to finance, how to make the case to your lab ops colleagues, how would you articulate Polycarbon's closed loop recycling solution?
Um, that's a dynamic question. So it depends on the stage of the company we're discussing this with and who exactly the audience is. But I would say, number one, this is an inevitability. We already know that the brands kind of leading our industry are already headed in this direction. And then probably within the next decade, it's going to be an expectation that everyone can account for the scope 3 emissions associated with their single-use plastics in their laboratories. We think that is an inevitability in this space. And so the sooner you adopt practices and the sooner you start tracking and reporting this information, the better off you're going to be for the future. But in the near term, we're normally thinking in terms of quarterly, yearly budgets. And this comes back to kind of the point we've already drilled down on, but we really should be thinking about, if we know we want to avoid the landfill, what is the most cost-effective solution for this plastic? And when you combine the cost savings of reducing overclassification, like what we just talked about, which again is taking material out of red bag waste that shouldn't be there and putting it in a more sustainable, more cost-effective stream, as well as buying products that ultimately contribute to the sustainability goals of the laboratory, you're going to be able to achieve the ultimate mission for the least amount of cost.
Yeah, I think that a really salient message that we've seen resonate with our colleagues is that this should be articulated to stakeholders within the organization as a replacement cost as opposed to a net new cost. When services for landfill diversion are implemented in laboratories, this is often diverted material that represents a cost by way of another outlet that can now be adopted and integrated into a closed loop recycling solution. So I find that it's often quite effective to articulate this as a replacement cost as opposed to a net new cost.
That's another. I'm going to double tap actually because I think it's a really good point. So often when we talk to customers, they hear the pitch and they see new boxes, they hear new terms, and they think everything is cost accretive. And it's like, no, you have a defined waste stream, a defined volume that you're producing on a monthly and annual basis. We are basically reorganizing it. And so a lot of times when we initially present to customers, the feeling is that, oh, great, this is just something new for me to do that's going to add to my bottom line. And the answer is no, we're essentially reorganizing it so it ultimately costs you less.
And how do you think about transforming this material stream, these plastics, from what historically has been described as a liability into one that's an asset for these organizations?
Yeah, I love that terminology because I think that's the way you and I view this, which is most folks view waste as a liability, as a burden, and they will pay money to make it go away and they don't want to think about it ever again. But we have an opportunity in our space because the majority of our waste is single-use plastic. Overwhelming majority of the waste coming out of our facilities are single-use plastics. And it just so happens that those single-use plastics are uniquely suited for recycling. It just so happens that recycling that material into products ultimately tethers into a market demand for more sustainable products. We are like the perfect ecosystem for turning that liability, that waste product, into an asset, into a resource, and ultimately creating a closed loop system that reduces the largest source of CO2 emissions for our industry. And with that, we're going to wrap it up. Thank you all for joining today. We look forward to new questions in the Monday morning mailbag. Remember to contact us at support@polycarbin.com, subject line MMM. We'll talk soon.